Let me give you an early warning. I'm about to show you something terrible. It's vision of the cruel and bloodthirsty murders still happening in Gaza, even though the ceasefire is in place and the war, we hope, is over. You see, Hamas are now back in control of the central areas vacated by the Israeli Defence Forces under the ceasefire. And Hamas, as is their way, as has always been their way, have been executing their rivals or anyone who dares to oppose them. And while we won't show you the actual executions, this is distressing vision. Yeah, how about the crowds gathering to watch? That was Gaza yesterday. This is terrible. It's nothing new, of course. Hamas has operated like this for the 2 decades that it's run Gaza, and it just shows you why Israel, with America's backing, was right to try to eliminate Hamas after the October the 7th atrocities. And by the way, it also underlines why Anthony Albanese has been so wrong so often by repeatedly calling for ceasefires when Hamas and Hezbollah in the north were all-powerful, raining rockets on Israel, killing innocents and terrorising populations, Israeli and Palestinians alike. Albanese kept saying that Israel should stop pursuing Hamas. What lunacy. The latest killings also show why it's imperative that the remnants of Hamas are disarmed as soon as possible, as they are supposed to do under Stage 2 of the peace plan, a point underlined today by the US President.
We have told them we want to disarm, and they will disarm. And if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. And it'll happen quickly and perhaps violently. But they will disarm. Do you understand me?
Yes.
This is the critical next step. But the point I want to make today relates to the media coverage of these executions. And not because I want to play games by poking fun at media rivals. This stuff is important. The coverage of the Gaza war has been dishonest and distorted, as I've shown you time and time again. And this has actually impacted on events. The propaganda coming out of Gaza, amplified by the media in the West, the self-censorship of the Western media as they've demonised Israel, well, that's helped to turn popular opinion against Israel. And it's led to governments like Australia's abandoning Israel and recognising a non-existent Palestinian state. And this, of course, has only emboldened Hamas and therefore extended the war. It's my view that if the international media had reported accurately and fairly on this war, and governments had kept the pressure on Hamas rather than demonised Israel, well, the war would have been over much earlier, perhaps a year earlier, with fewer lives lost, of course. But we'll never know. Anyway, let me explain how these executions and their coverage give away the bias and deceptions of the media. Remember, just a few weeks ago, I reported similar executions and I revealed how much of the media, including our taxpayer-funded ABC, were not reporting them. A warning again, distressing pictures here. These are Hamas terrorists who still control the people of Gaza, are still fighting against Israel, and here they are executing at least 3 people accused of collaborating with Israel. We won't show you what happens next, but believe me, the video does show the executions. This is the reality of Hamas-run Gaza, exposed on the very day that our government recognised the non-existent state of Palestine, which is half run by Hamas at the moment. And while the ABC gave blanket coverage of Albanese and Wong in New York, we have found no coverage of these real events in Gaza on the ABC website. Perhaps they'll enlighten us. But this is happening even though the BBC reported these executions and they verified that the video was shot in the middle of Gaza City. Apparently, none of this was news at the ABC. Now, I've also shown you how Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price saw that report and put the relevant questions directly to the ABC boss and got very little in response.
On Sky News, the Kenny report on Tuesday the 23rd of September, Kenny noted that while the ABC gave blanket coverage of Albanese and Wong in New York, we have found no coverage of these real events in Gaza on the ABC website. Now, I've also done a bit of research for ABC's coverage of this story and I haven't found anything. I'm happy to stand corrected if that's not the case, but it appears as though these events weren't widely covered by the ABC, and I suppose I'd like to understand why that's the case.
The particular story you refer to in terms of Mr Kenny, I'm not aware of that particular story. I'm not aware of the decision that was made to cover or not cover that particular issue. Obviously, I don't have any doubt that the ABC has covered the atrocities of Hamas and how they operate. I don't think our audience would be any doubts about that.
Well, I beg to differ. If you relied on the ABC, you'd have very little idea about the horrors of Hamas. Now, I've done an online search and I can't find any reporting of those executions last month in the 9 media newspapers, either the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. The point is that while the Green Left media was busy demonising Israel, then showing the ruthless violence of Hamas just didn't suit their narrative. So often it's not about the facts with these people, it's about the narrative. But today, with the war over for now, we saw the latest executions were covered. The 9 media newspapers ran the story and we could see straight away why it now suited their narrative. The killings threatened Trump's Gaza peace plan. As US President Donald Trump and other world leaders were promising peace, the article said, Hamas fighters dragged 7 men into a small square in Gaza City, forced them to kneel on the ground and shot them. Yeah, an earlier headline even directly referenced the Trump peace plan. The executions suit their narrative now because they can be used against Trump's peace plan to suggest it's not working, whereas previously they helped to justify Israel's war, the war, by the way, that Trump supported. Pretty clear, isn't it? And it's pretty sick. It's the same for the ABC. Hamas executions they failed to report while the war continued, they now report as a threat to the peace plan. The ABC reported how 7 men were dragged into the Gaza City square, hands tied behind their backs, forced to their knees and shot from behind as dozens of people looked on. The ABC report then said Donald Trump has previously given his blessing to Hamas to reassert some control of Gaza, at least temporarily. You see what they did there? When Israel was fighting a war against Hamas with Trump support, Hamas executions were not worth reporting. Now there's a ceasefire, Hamas executions are worth reporting because they're Trump's fault. I keep telling you, most of the media doesn't exist to inform you. They are out to misinform you. This is just intellectually and morally indefensible, and they're never held to account. Now, of course, it's a good thing that the leftist media is now reporting these executions. They should be sharing the facts about the barbarity and the evil of Hamas. But it's worth noting why they've changed their approach. One ABC reporter even spoke about Hamas barbarity on the 7:30 program last night.
So what Hamas does in these occasions when the Israeli troops pull out is try and reassert control right across the areas that the IDF has left in Gaza Strip, try to eliminate rivals. It justifies it by saying these are collaborators with Israel, but really this is also an exercise in control, in saying we are still here, we are still the main force in Gaza, and we're the dominant faction on the ground.
Yeah, it might have been a good idea to talk a little more about those sorts of tactics over the past 2 years, don't you think? Perhaps the ABC will soon get around to noting that Hamas is an Islamist extremist outfit too, rather than pretending they're fighting for a Palestinian state. But don't hold your breath. I mean, have a look at the ABC's news coverage last night about yesterday's momentous events and the release of the final 20 Israeli hostages.
The families of the returned Israeli hostages tightly embracing their loved ones. The feeling of joy reflected in Tel Aviv's Hostage Square.
It was really hard to keep hoping and believing, but amazingly it worked and they're home.
Not bad. I mean, there was nothing about the torture and the trauma they'd been through, or how they were innocents kidnapped for no plausible reason, or that 100 of their compatriots were killed in captivity. But at least the ABC shared some of the joy and the relief. But then have a look at how they covered Palestinian prisoners being released, suspected terrorists and convicted murderers and the like.
Excitement builds to a hero's welcome. These are among thousands of Palestinians detained by Israel during the war and held without charge. 1,700 have been released into the arms of families and friends. The time spent behind bars etched on their faces.
It was terrible. 2 years of torture, of pain. They broke us day and night.
Moain Wach says he also suffered abuse after his arrest a year ago in northern Gaza.
Every day they would beat us. The Secret Service also beat me. Torture was daily.
Similar scenes playing out in the West Bank as prisoners serving life sentences for security offences were released.
Yeah, lesson number 1 of the Islamist terrorist handbook is that if you're ever captured, you must claim that you were tortured in captivity. Anyone with any knowledge of terror groups knows this basic rule. The ABC just runs with those claims, unchecked, of course, unverifiable. The ABC failed to mention either the murder offences and the terrorist atrocities of those prisoners released. They just said they were imprisoned for security offences, apparently. That's the ABC for you. It takes the release of innocent hostages, kidnapped, held and starved over 2 years, while 100 fellow hostages were killed, and its news coverage virtually equates that with the release of terrorists arrested for murders and atrocities and others detained for suspicion of terrorism links. And as ever, it's the Islamist terrorists and the terror suspects who are portrayed as the victims. It's extraordinary. When most of the people whose taxes pay their wages at the ABC would actually prefer a national broadcaster that calls out the evils of Islamist terrorism and shares all the relevant facts.